In March 2019, a man walked into Synagogue Beth Shalom in Brussels carrying a leather briefcase and wearing a black kippah. His name was Rabbi Yosef Levine. He spoke Hebrew with a Sephardic accent, quoted Maimonides during Shabbat discussions, and within 3 weeks had been invited to lead a Torah study group for young professionals. By June, he was counseling families through grief. By September, he had access to the private homes of community leaders, security volunteers, and Belgian Jewish Congress members who coordinated with both local police and Israeli diplomatic staff. No one questioned his background deeply. Converts are common in progressive communities. Widowers are treated gently. And a rabbi who asks thoughtful questions about Jewish law while avoiding questions about his past life that reads as trauma, not deception. But Rabbi Yosef Levine didn't exist. The man behind that identity was Mahmoud al-Farouk, a Hamas intelligence officer who had spent 18 months learning to become someone he could never truly be. His mission was simple: gain trust, access financial networks, identify vulnerabilities in European Jewish institutional security, and report everything back to his handlers in Beirut. What al-Farouk didn't know was that Mossad had been watching him since his second week in Brussels. And what Mossad didn't know was that by the time they identified him, he had already begun to crack. Not from pressure, from belief. The operation began 14 months earlier in a training facility outside Sidon, Lebanon. Hamas counterintelligence had identified a pattern in Mossad. Surveillance Israeli intelligence was tracking donation flows through European Jewish community organizations. Not to stop the money, to map networks. Hamas didn't want to disrupt those networks. They wanted to control them. Al-Farouk was chosen because his background made the deception structurally sound. His mother was Sephardic Jewish, a genealogical fact confirmed through Syrian Mukhabarat files after his family fled Aleppo in 2012. He had studied linguistics at Damascus University and spoke 4 languages fluently. More importantly, he had lived in Istanbul for 2 years, working as a translator, which meant he understood how to navigate between cultures without triggering suspicion. But the critical decision, the one that would later define everything, was that Hamas gave him a real conversion certificate. Not forged, legitimate. Issued by a progressive rabbi in Buenos Aires who conducted conversions via video call during COVID-19 restrictions. Al-Farouk had actually converted to Judaism. The prayers he memorized weren't just tactical. The rituals he practiced weren't solely operational. Hamas believed this made the cover unbreakable. You can't fake what's technically true. His handler, a man named Whale, had been explicit during final preparations. You're not pretending to be Jewish. You are Jewish. That's what makes you invisible. Every word you speak will be true. Every prayer will be real. The only lie is why you're there. Al-Farouk had nodded, but even then, he had felt something shift a small question he couldn't articulate. If the conversion was real, if the prayers were real, if the identity was legally and religiously legitimate, what part of him was still performing? Brussels was selected because the Jewish community numbered roughly 30,000, large enough that a newcomer wouldn't be unusual, small enough that a respected rabbi would quickly gain influence. Al-Farouk's cover story was airtight. He had converted in Buenos Aires. His wife Sarah had died in a car accident 6 months later, and he wanted to rebuild his life in a community where his grief didn't define him. The grief was the tactical masterpiece. No one interrogates a widower about inconsistencies in his past. No one asks why he deflects certain questions about his late wife's family, or why he doesn't have photographs from the wedding. Grief creates social distance that reads as pain rather than evasion. Within 2 months, Rabbi Levine was leading weekly Torah study sessions. Within 4, he was being invited to community security briefings meetings where Belgian Jewish volunteers coordinated with local police about threats from anti-Semitic groups, far-right extremists, and potential Islamic militant surveillance. He sat in those meetings taking notes. He asked thoughtful questions about threat assessment protocols. He suggested improvements to synagogue security measures that were actually designed to map vulnerabilities for future Hamas operations. And then, in late August 2019, something happened that no one had planned for. A woman named Rachel Goldstein approached him after Shabbat services. She was French-Israeli, a translator who had moved to Brussels 2 years earlier. She asked if they could talk privately about something theological, a question about conversion and identity that she said had been troubling her since her own return to observance after personal trauma. They spoke for 40 minutes in an empty study room. She asked questions about what it meant to choose Judaism rather than inherit it, whether conversion created a different relationship with God than birth, whether someone who becomes Jewish ever stops feeling like they're performing. Al-Farouk answered honestly, more honestly than he had intended. He told her that some days he felt more Jewish than people born into it, because every prayer was a choice rather than habit. Other days, he felt like an imposter who would be exposed the moment someone asked the right question. She had looked at him for a long moment, then said, "That's the most honest thing anyone said to me in this community." What Al-Farouk didn't know was that Rachel Goldstein was Mossad. She had been embedded in Brussels for 26 months, monitoring for exactly this kind of infiltration. And what Rachel didn't report to her handler was that during those 40 minutes she had become uncertain whether Rabbi Yosef Levine was a Hamas operative or whether Mahmoud Al-Farouk had accidentally become the person he was pretending to be. 3 weeks later, Mossad confirmed Al-Farouk's true identity through biometric analysis of surveillance footage. His walking gait had reverted to military posture for 4 seconds when he thought he was alone. But by then, Rachel had already done something that violated every protocol in her operational training. She had started to trust him. Mossad doesn't expose assets immediately when they discover them. Exposure is waste. The greater value lies in conversion, turning an enemy operative into a controlled channel of disinformation, or, better yet, a genuine double agent. The recruitment approach was assigned to a Mossad case officer named David Cohen. His methodology was psychological rather than confrontational. No threats, no dramatic revelations. Just a carefully constructed reality that would make Al-Farouk question everything his handlers had told him. In February 2020, David approached Rabbi Levine after evening prayers. He introduced himself as a community security volunteer, which was technically true, though not his primary function. He suggested they talk somewhere private. They walked to a cafe 3 blocks away. David placed a single photograph on the table between them. It showed Al-Farouk's mother, Fatima, standing outside a mosque in Gaziantep, Turkey. The metadata indicated the photo was taken 6 weeks earlier. She was alive, healthy, speaking with other Syrian refugees. Hamas had told Al-Farouk that his mother had died in a regime airstrike in Aleppo in 2018. Her death had been the emotional anchor that justified his sacrifice 18 months of training, permanent exile from his identity, a mission he could never leave. He was doing this in part to honor her memory. David let the silence extend for 23 seconds before speaking. "Your handlers lied to you because isolation creates dependency. Dependent assets don't question orders. We know who you are, Mahmoud. We know who sent you. We know your training location and your primary handler's name. And we know that if you contact Hamas to verify what I'm telling you, they'll assume you've been compromised and eliminate you as a security risk. It was a perfect trap. Verification would trigger suspicion. Silence would leave Al-Farouk trapped between competing realities, unable to trust either side." David continued, "We're not asking you to betray Hamas. We're offering you a choice. Work with us for 18 months. Feed us intelligence on European financial networks. When the operation concludes, we extract you and your mother to a third country. Somewhere neither Hamas nor anyone else will find you. You disappear. She lives. You both get a future that doesn't end in a shallow grave." Al-Farouk stared at the photograph. His mother's face. The way she held her cane, she'd injured her hip in 2011 before the war. Every detail suggested authenticity. He asked for 48 hours to decide. David said, "You have 12. After that, we assume you've chosen Hamas, and you become a different kind of problem." What David didn't know, what the entire Mossad operational team didn't know, was that Rachel had already made contact with Al-Farouk outside official channels. 4 days. Before David's approach, Rachel had invited Al-Farouk to coffee under the pretext of discussing interfaith dialogue initiatives. But 20 minutes into their conversation, she had shifted topics. "When you talk about your wife," Rachel had said, "you describe her death, but you never describe her life. You mention grief, but you never mention specific memories, love stories have textures. Yours doesn't. Al-Farouk had felt his chest tighten. This was the exposure moment, the instant where everything collapsed. But Rachel hadn't arrested him, hadn't signaled for backup. She had simply said, "I'm not asking you to explain. I'm telling you that someone will notice eventually. And when they do, you'll need to decide whether you want to survive or whether you want to remain loyal to people who are probably lying to you." Then she had paid for both coffees and left. Al-Farouk had spent 3 nights trying to decode what had just happened. Was she Mossad? Was she testing him on behalf of Hamas counterintelligence? Was she a genuine community member who had simply noticed inconsistencies? When David showed him the photograph of his mother, Al-Farouk understood. Rachel had been preparing him, softening the ground, making him question his own narrative before Mossad delivered the proof that his entire mission was built on a lie. But there was something Rachel's warning had revealed that Mossad hadn't intended. She had given him advance notice, which meant she had violated protocol, which meant she had risked her own operation to protect him. Al-Farouk agreed to David's terms, but not for the reasons Mossad assumed. For 6 months, the operation functioned exactly as designed. Al-Farouk continued his rabbinical duties while feeding Mossad detailed intelligence on Hamas financial networks in Europe. He identified 3 money laundering operations, 2 additional sleeper agents in Berlin and Paris, and provided communication protocols that allowed Mossad to intercept encrypted messages. Hamas, meanwhile, believed their operation was succeeding flawlessly. Al-Farouk's reports contained genuine intelligence mixed with carefully crafted disinformation that Mossad had authorized him to pass along. He was, in effect, feeding both sides exactly what they wanted to hear. But in July 2020, Al-Farouk did something neither side had anticipated. He contacted his Hamas handler not to report compromise, but to propose mission expansion. He suggested that Rabbi Levine could be more effective if he developed relationships with moderate Muslim community leaders in Brussels. Interfaith dialogue would give him access to Islamic organizations that Israeli intelligence monitored closely, creating opportunities for Hamas to identify which Muslim leaders were cooperating with Mossad. Hamas approved immediately. They saw it as brilliant tactical evolution. Mossad also approved when Al-Farouk reported the new direction. They interpreted it as Al-Farouk demonstrating initiative to maintain his cover's credibility. Neither side understood his actual objective. Al-Farouk was building an exit strategy. If he could establish genuine relationships within Brussels' Muslim community, he could eventually disappear into that network when everything collapsed. A place where neither Hamas nor Mossad could easily extract him. A community where his Arabic would be native, his cultural knowledge authentic, and his presence unremarkable. He was preparing to betray both sides simultaneously. What no one in Mossad's operational chain had reported upward, what Rachel had deliberately omitted from her intelligence summaries, was that she had identified Al-Farouk as a Hamas operative 3 months before David made the recruitment pitch. She had run her own assessment outside official channels, watched him for weeks, analyzed his behavioral patterns, his linguistic choices, the micro-expressions that appeared when certain topics arose in conversation. And she had reached a conclusion that contradicted standard Mossad doctrine. Al-Farouk wasn't just performing Jewish identity. He was experiencing genuine religious transformation. The prayers weren't tactical, memorization. The Talmudic discussions weren't intelligence gathering. He was becoming Rabbi Yosef Levine in ways that terrified him because they made his original identity obsolete. Rachel had made a calculated decision: don't expose him immediately. Let him continue. Because an operative undergoing identity crisis is exponentially more vulnerable to recruitment than one who remains ideologically committed. She had engineered the entire recruitment operation: the photograph of his mother, the 12-hour deadline, the promise of extraction. David thought he was running the approach. He was actually executing Rachel's script, but Rachel had made one critical error in her assessment. She assumed Al-Farouk's religious transformation made him vulnerable to Mossad's manipulation. She didn't consider that it might make him immune to everyone's manipulation, including hers. By August 2020, Al-Farouk had figured out that Rachel was Mossad. Not through surveillance or counter-interrogation, but because she knew details about his childhood that he had never shared as Rabbi Levine. details that only existed in Hamas files or Israeli intelligence intercepts. He didn't confront her. He started feeding her information designed to make her look effective to her handlers while protecting Hamas's core networks from complete exposure. He was managing both intelligence services simultaneously, playing each against the other, buying time to construct his third option. But what Al-Farouq didn't know was that Hamas counterintelligence had begun noticing anomalies. Financial cells were being compromised weeks after Rabbi Levine gained proximity to related networks. The correlation wasn't direct. There were time delays, alternative explanations, other potential sources. But a counterintelligence officer named Tariq Mansour had started compiling a pattern analysis, and patterns, once identified, demand explanation. In November 2020, Mansour activated a test. He fed Al-Farouq false intelligence, a fabricated meeting between a Hamas logistics coordinator and a Belgian arms dealer, scheduled for December 3rd in Antwerp. If Mossad acted on it, the leak would be confirmed. Al-Farouq received the intelligence. He didn't pass it to Rachel. Because by then, he had realized something that would force everyone's hand. Rachel had been protecting him for months, withholding information from her own chain of command, which meant she had compromised herself. Which meant if Hamas discovered his betrayal, they would also discover hers. And Al-Farouq couldn't allow that. Not because of loyalty, not because of strategy, but because somewhere in the months of deception layered upon deception, he had developed the one thing that destroys operational security more completely than any interrogation technique. He had started to care whether she survived. When Al-Farouq didn't pass along the Antwerp intelligence, Tariq Mansour knew. Not with certainty, there were alternate explanations, communication delays, operational discretion. But Mansour had spent 17 years hunting moles inside Hamas networks. He trusted instinct over evidence. He didn't alert Al-Farouq's immediate handlers. That would trigger defensive protocols, erase digital trails, scatter the network before confirmation. Instead, Mansour authorized escalation without explanation, the kind of bureaucratic maneuver that looks routine until it's too late to reverse. On December 8, 2020, Al-Farouq received a coded message through the dead drop system he'd been using for 18 months. Family emergency. Return home immediately. Extraction 0300 Thursday. It was phrased as urgent relocation, but Al-Farouq recognized the architecture of the language. Hamas didn't extract assets for reassignment using family emergency codes. They used those codes for operatives who had been compromised and needed immediate quarantine before damage assessment. He had 38 hours before the car arrived. Al-Farouq's first instinct was to contact Rachel through their established protocol, a specific Torah commentary book checked out from the community library, with notes in the margins indicating meeting time and location. But that system required 24 hours minimum for her to check the drop and respond. He didn't have 24 hours. So he made a decision that violated every operational security principle he'd been taught. He called her personal mobile phone. Not the operational number, her actual phone, the one she used for civilian cover life. Rachel answered on the fourth ring. Background noise suggested a restaurant or cafe. Her voice was casual, unsuspecting. "Hello? It's Yosef. I need to see you." Now. Pause. 2 seconds. Long enough that Al-Farouq knew she was calculating whether this was compromise, whether the call was monitored, whether answering honestly would expose them both. Where? St. Catherine's Church. 20 minutes. He hung up before she could refuse. Churches were neutral ground, no Mossad surveillance, no Hamas watchers, no community members who might recognize either of them. It was also the kind of location that would seem bizarre in retrospect if either intelligence service reviewed the meeting later. Why would a rabbi and a Jewish community member meet in a church? The strangeness itself provided cover. It suggested spontaneity rather than coordination. Rachel arrived 23 minutes later. She didn't sit in the pew beside him. She stood in the side aisle, maintaining distance, her posture suggesting someone who had stopped briefly while walking somewhere else. "You called my personal phone." "I know. That means you're either panicking or setting me up." "Neither. I'm giving you a choice." He explained the extraction order. He explained his assessment that Hamas suspected compromise but didn't yet have proof. He explained that if he went to the safe house, they would interrogate him until they had names, protocols, timeline, everything that would identify Rachel as either his handler or his leak source. Rachel's expression didn't change. So, you run? We extract you now. Tonight, you disappear before they can move. And confirm everything they suspect. They'll know I was Mossad. They'll review every operation I touched, every person I met, every intelligence report I filed. They'll identify the pattern. They'll find you. That's my problem, not yours. It's both our problems, because I'm not running. This was the moment Rachel should have walked away, should have reported the contact, initiated emergency protocols, disappeared into a new cover identity before Hamas could connect them. Standard doctrine was unambiguous. When an asset becomes a liability, you cut them loose immediately. Instead, she sat down in the pew beside him. What are you proposing? I go to the safe house. Let them start the interrogation. Let them believe they've caught a Mossad. Double agent, then you raid it, rescue operation. You extract me under fire, eliminate whoever's running the interrogation. Hamas assumes you were tracking me and moved in before I could be broken. Both sides save face. You get credit for asset recovery. Hamas gets confirmation that I was compromised, which explains their operational losses without revealing how deep the penetration actually went. Rachel stared at the altar ahead of them, a crucified Christ suspended above candles in silence. You understand what you're describing is 30 minutes of real interrogation before we can breach without looking suspicious. I understand. Hamas interrogators don't ease into questioning. They start with pain and escalate from there. I know. Why would you do this? Al-Farouk didn't answer immediately, because the honest answer that he was trying to protect her from consequences she'd accepted when she chose intelligence work would reveal emotional compromise that would make her doubt his judgment, and because the tactical answer that it was the only plan that protected both operations simultaneously wasn't entirely true. Finally, because if I run, you'll spend the rest of your career wondering if I was playing you the entire time, and I need you to know I wasn't. It was the wrong thing to say. Rachel stood up, her operational mask reasserting itself. This is a mistake. You're making decisions based on emotion, not strategy. Maybe, but you're still going to authorize the raid. She turned to face him directly. Why are you so certain? Because you called me back when I used your personal phone. You should have ignored it, reported the contact, let your superiors handle the compromise. But you answered, which means you've already made the same mistake I have. Rachel left the church without responding, but 90 minutes later, Al-Farouk received a text from an unknown number. Thursday, URI 330, hold position 28 minutes after arrival. NW corner farthest from entry point. The raid was authorized. The car arrived at 2:47 a.m., 13 minutes early, which meant Hamas was testing his punctuality. Operatives following protocol arrive exactly on time. Operatives who've been warned arrive early, already packed, visibly nervous. Al-Farouk was sitting at his kitchen table drinking tea when the knock came. He answered, holding the cup, wearing house clothes, looking like someone interrupted during insomnia rather than someone expecting extraction. The driver said nothing during the 40-minute drive to Liège. The industrial suburb was dark, warehouses shuttered, no witnesses. The safe house was a converted textile factory, 3 stories, minimal windows, a single entrance visible from the street. Tariq Mansour was waiting in a second-floor room that had been cleared of furniture except for a metal chair, a video camera on a tripod, and a folding table with interrogation tools arranged in precise rows. Mansour gestured to the chair. Sit, Al-Farouk sat. He had 28 minutes before Rachel's team would breach. 28 minutes to be convincing enough that Hamas believed the interrogation was progressing, but not so convincing that Mansour extracted actionable intelligence before the raid. Mansour didn't begin with questions. He began with photograph surveillance images of Al-Farouk meeting David at the cafe, entering Rachel's apartment building, checking books out of the library with margin notes visible. How long? Al-Farouk could have deflected, claimed the photos were misinterpreted, demanded to speak with his primary handler, but that would buy time Hamas didn't intend to give him. So he made the decision Rachel had predicted. He told a lie built on pieces of truth. Since the beginning. Before Brussels. Before Buenos Aires. The conversion was Mossad operational cover. The rabbi who certified me was an asset. You were compromised before I left training. Mansour's expression didn't change, but his posture shifted a barely perceptible straightening that indicated recalibration. If Al-Farouk had been Mossad from the start, it meant every aspect of the operation was contaminated. Training protocols, handler selection, vetting procedures. The paranoia would be organizationally devastating. Prove it. My case officer's name is Maya Bressler. She runs European network penetration out of Tel Aviv Station. The money you paid for my training came from a shell company in Cyprus that's been laundering Mossad operational funds since 2016. The dead drop system you gave me was designed by Mossad to be easily monitored. You were never running me. You were being studied. It was a masterpiece of misdirection, true names, false connections, real infrastructure applied to fictional timelines. Mansour would need weeks to disprove it. And by then, the damage to Hamas internal trust would be irreversible. Mansour stood. He walked to the window overlooking the street. He stayed there for 11 seconds. Then he turned around and said, "You're lying." Al-Farouk's chest went cold. The Antwerp meeting. December 3rd. We fed you that intelligence to test for leaks. Mossad didn't act on it, which means either you never passed it along or you're not actually Mossad. Either way, your story doesn't hold. The clock inside Al-Farouk's head showed 14 minutes remaining. Not enough time for Mansour to extract the truth, but enough time for him to realize the raid was coming and evacuate before Rachel's team arrived. Al-Farouk shifted tactics. I didn't pass it along because it was obviously a test. Bad tradecraft. Mossad trained me better than Hamas trained you. Mansour smiled. Not with humor, with recognition. There it is, pride. You finally said something real. He walked back to the table and picked up a pair of pliers. We have time. Let's see what else is real. The interrogation began.